But there is a fight card tonight. UFC 204. There's a belt on the line. A couple of interesting fights as well. As always, on Saturdays, we are joined talking about UFC with the MMA insider himself, Dizz. You can follow him on Twitter at TalkMMA. How you doing, my friend?
ESPN South Jersey. How are you guys doing today?
I'm doing well. It's like you were at an airport there for a sec.
I'm off the exit. I'm 100 miles out of Kansas City from. I went to the World Series of Fighting event in Kansas, 33 event in Kansas City last night. So I'm actually on my way back to Indiana. So, but we have another fight card tonight. It's just a meat sandwich of MMA this weekend.
It really is. And before we get into UFC 204, I did want to touch on UFC 205 because, regionally it does have a lot of relevance because Philly's own Eddie Alvarez will be defending his lightweight belt against Conor McGregor. And there's a couple of storylines going into this I want to touch on with you with because, Eddie Alvarez, when he won that belt, he was very insistent. I want to either defend my belt in Philadelphia or I want to be on that UFC 205 card. He stuck by that despite all the rumors, despite all the spin that was coming out in the media. He got his way.
100% he got his way. And listen, this fight was only going to make sense if it was going to, this card, you take the thunder out of this card if there was no Eddie Alvarez versus Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor there's a huge Irish fan base in New York. And then you have Eddie Alvarez, who is from Philadelphia and has a massive fan base as well in Philadelphia, has a massive fan base in Jersey, especially since he trains with Frankie Edgar and all of them. And then also in New York as well. He just bleeds all over that area. So it didn't make sense for that fight not to happen on that card.
On the McGregor side of it, this guy just talks a lot, so it's hard to know how much of it is really him just pumping himself up or how much of it is really real. But it does look like that he may only have another fight after this fight because he's saying that he's going to take time off when his wife gives birth.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have a source on that as well who told me he spent about 15 minutes with Conor McGregor and Dee, McGregor's girlfriend, and said that she was pregnant and said that he was going to take time off after this fight. That is just coming from a source. Now, allegedly, that is supposed to be the big announcement that, for some reason, I don't know why it was called left field from Dana, but he said that Conor had maybe it was just because it took him and the UFC by surprise, but he said, Conor has an announcement after the fight that just, came out of nowhere, out of left field. Like, okay, well, maybe left field to you, but if he's wanting to take time off, if he's making $40 million in the year 2016, he's been one of the busiest fighters in the UFC in the last year. Why not? Let the guy have some time off.
Talking with Talk MMA on Twitter, Dizz MMA Insider here on Sports Bash Saturday on 97.3 ESPN. Let's hit on UFC 204 now. That is the fight card that's on tonight. Main event is Michael Bisping. So he finally gets the belt. He's been toiling all these years, fighting, gets his shot, gets the belt, and then he says, I want to avenge my loss. I mean, guys don't usually do stuff like this.
No, when the fight initially was announced that it was Dan Henderson, or at least that when he said he wanted to fight Dan Henderson, I was highly underwhelmed by it. But now, since the fight has already been announced, it's like, okay, you know what? The fight's announced. There's nothing we can do about it. Let's just gear up for this fight. And overwhelmingly, he got knocked out cold in their first outing at UFC 100. The card is taking place.
And then let's remind people, that's the only time he's been knocked out cold like that in his career.
That's correct. But and not to mention, he is still on local time right now out in England. He is on our local time right now. He's had to keep his body on our time just so that he could peak at the right time during the Henderson fight.
Right.
And I believe that's probably how – I don't know if Henderson's done it the same way since he's been there or not, but the fight is taking place at the same time here as it normally would take place. But, however, over there, It's taking place at 3 a.m. The card starts at 3 a.m. GMT. So this is going to be this is typical. A lot of people are making a big deal out of this, but when the UFC goes out of the country, it's not unlike them to start to have oddball times at that location, and just to keep the stateside crowds happy.
Right, because they know where their main buyer is going to come from in the pay-per-view buys.
That's correct.
And the event, as Dizz mentioned, is at Manchester Arena. Bisping is from England, and when they fought the first time, him and Henderson, it was in Las Vegas at UFC 100. On the flip side, Dan Henderson, since his last blow over Michael Bisping, he's had one of the more bizarre stretches of his career, because he left the UFC, went to Strikeforce, had a bunch of big money fights, won a belt over there, then comes back to the UFC. He had a 3-fight losing streak, then gets a win, and then just kind of was like win, lose, win, lose. And it seemed like after the win over Hector Lombard, we all thought, all right, his career is over. He got a win. He can walk away. And then Bisping calls him out, and it's like, is this guy ever going to walk away?
Legitimately, Dan Henderson is 3-6 of his last 9 fights, and he is 2-3 of his last 5 fights. So, yeah, it's bizarre for even anybody with this type of a record to be getting a championship title fight. And it's only because Michael Bisping told the UFC, this is what I want. Hey, you guys asked me to step up, and I do. You guys asked me to do this, and I do. I stepped up. I faced Anderson Silva, and on short notice, and beat him. And now, was that short notice?
What's that?
No, he stepped in on Luke Rockhold and beat him on short notice.
Bisping did, yeah.
Anderson Silva. Yeah. So, won the title that way. But, this was probably had a lot to do with Dan Henderson saying, hey, listen, just give me this title fight and I'm taking a bow, win or lose. So, essentially, this fight is supposed to be his swan song. He is supposed to be done after this fight. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. I want to believe him and say he's going to retire, but let's, in Dana's famous words, let's see what happens.
Yeah. If Bisping wins this fight, as many people expect, who do you think he'll be defending the belt against next?
I would have to. Well, it's going to depend on a couple of things, actually. Chris Weidman and Yoel Romero is going to fight at 205. Are going to fight at 205, and then there's Rockhold and Jacare who are going to rematch as well. So depending on the outcomes of those fights, who looks the most impressive? For instance, I don't believe that Romero is going to get a title shot if he has a lackluster performance against Chris Weidman and vice versa. And it's going to be the same way. I think it's going to be whoever looks the most impressive between those two fights. And this is a time for those guys to shine as well. It's time for them to say, hey, listen, I have to make a statement here if I want that title fight. And that's life. That's the fight business.
Speaking of middleweights, an interesting fight is the co-main event, Vitor Belfort versus Gegard Mousasi. Two guys who actually are kind of similar fighters. They're known for their striking. They have, kind of overlooked grappling games. Belfort, we know he's not the phenom young kid anymore. But him versus Mousasi seems to be a matchup that's, I think, going to come down to, what guy is actually going to fight smart.
Well, first of all, yeah, and Belfort's going to have to be even smarter now because in the rumor mill is that he's having a bad weight cut, and if that's true, we're not going to see a very good Belfort. Not that Belfort lately off the TRT, if you will, looks that fantastic anyway.
We know he loves beanie hats. We know that much.
We do know that he loves blows to the back of the head too. And Gegard Mousasi, what's this do for him after this win? I mean, it bolsters him. It puts him back in a legitimate position. And who knows? Maybe someday he'll get that rematch with Uriah Hall, so that he can prove that first fight was a fluke. So, that's going to be, again, up to him. As of right now, he's riding a 2-fight win streak versus Talis Lightis, and he knocked out Thiago Santos at UFC 200. So, not the greatest names. I mean, Talis Lightis has great jiu-jitsu, and he doesn't really have a striking game. So, we'll have to see. But he is 4-1 in his last 5 fights, including a win over Dan Henderson.
One more fight I want to hit on with you. Obviously, it's a very heavy European card because it's being held in England. You have fights like Ovince St. Preux versus Jimmy Manua, also Stefan Struve's on the card. But the fight that's the top of the Fox Sports prelims is very interesting to me. Brad Pickett versus Iri Alcantara. This Brad Pickett was a guy, I remember years ago, everyone thought he was going to be the next contender. And then he just fell off the face of the earth. And it seems like he's trying to rework his way back up the ladder here.
Yeah, look, and that's the thing with Brad Pickett. He can end a fight in one punch. However, he's got a major issue right now. He has lost 3 fights out of his last 4 to Ian McCall, Chico Camus, and Thomas Almeida as well. He lost to Thomas Almeida by a knockout, and also Francisco Rivera, he barely won that fight. And Francisco Rivera, at this point, is not considered, cream of the crop at this point. So how much has he fallen off exactly? He has been his last fight, his fight that he lost against Thomas Almeida was his return to bantamweight.
Right.
So now he's fighting bigger guys. On the flip side of that, you have your Alcantara. And this guy right now, he is 2-2 in his last 4. I mean, it's not really impressive, but he did lose to Jimmy Rivera. He did lose to Frankie Sands. Not that that means anything to him. But I honestly think that this is a fight that was tailor-made for Brad Pickett.
Yeah, definitely. I appreciate you joining me. I know you're driving on your way back to Indiana. For everyone who wants to check out your UFC 204 picks, go check him out on Twitter at TalkMMA. He'll pick the whole slate there. And also follow him tonight. He'll be keeping you updated on different things going on with the fights. My friend, safe travels.
Hey, thanks a lot. Thanks, Jersey.